Neighborhood church won't tell you how to vote. We won't tell you which policies to support or which politicians you should be outraged at. Instead of all that, let's take a look at how Jesus transcends politics. And let's explore how Christians can hold meaningful influence in a fractured political environment.
Second service, we doing all right? It is so good to be with you. School's officially going, I think, pretty much everywhere. Some people are happy about it. That's good. Hey, we're kind of, this is week 3 of a 4-week series called Party Crasher. We're talking Jesus, we're talking politics, we're merging sort of, what does it mean? How does religion and politics sort of interact? We're sort of taking the two things you should never talk about at family dinner, and we just want to talk about it. And so far, nobody has, threatened my life or anything. So far, it feels really good. So I think we've been having a decent amount of fun through this series. And the series is meant to sort of build on itself. And so it's a little unique that way. So if you've missed, if this is your first time, you're just tuning in, I would suggest go back and listen to the first 2 weeks, because there's some stuff that God said in those teachings that kind of connect to what we're saying today. And you may be thinking today, how come he's not saying, A, B, C? And I probably already did. I just did it in another teaching. And so in the first week, we discussed, can a nation be Christian? That was the question we asked. Last week, we asked, is there a Christian political party? And then this week, I want to talk about what happens when, sort of in our society anyway, the inevitable happens. When politics and that political divide pull us apart from each other. When it really does begin to fracture and have an impact on the relationships that we have. Maybe it's in our families, in our workplaces, with our friendships. Many of you, I know, especially since COVID, you've at least distanced yourself from people, and it's really over a political divide, a political sort of fault line, and I wonder if that's necessary. And I wonder what Jesus has to say about it, and that's what I'd like us to kind of dive into this morning. And, this week I was thinking, how should I kind of kick off this morning? And I was reminded, I was a sophomore in high school, it was 1992. Lots of things were happening in 1992, but in 1992, you might remember a guy named Rodney King. Do you remember Rodney King and the LA riots? Right? This was a really, really big deal. Rodney King, a black man who'd been beaten nearly to death. There were 4 Los Angeles police officers. There was a video. There was a trial. It was a very, very big deal. Very, very public. I think today, it's just like constant video. But in 1992, this was pretty intense. And you might remember that the 4 police officers that were charged with police brutality were not convicted. And this led to crazy outrage in Los Angeles. And it led to what today we call the LA riots. And if, again, you probably saw it all over the news, but it was very violent. 53 people were killed during the LA riots, 7,000 buildings torched. So much mayhem. And it was live on TV for the most part because of helicopters flying over all of the scenes. And you would kind of catch it live as it was happening. And there was one particularly violent moment that was done against a white truck driver. You might remember that scene. And that was when somebody convinced Rodney King to go live on TV and to say something. And so if you remember the interview, he gets on TV. He's obviously very nervous to do this interview. But in the interview, he says something that sort of caught on. And maybe not in the way that society needed it to catch on, but it caught on. And here's what Rodney King said. He said, "Can't we all just get along? Please, we can get along here. We can all get along. We're all stuck here for a while. Let's try to work it out." Now, King's question, can't we all just get along? Great question, but it quickly became sort of this catchphrase in society, maybe you remember, where it was like a joke. I mean, you would say it for like cheap laughs. If somebody was disagreeing, you'd say, well, can't we all just get along? And everybody would laugh. It quickly became a joke rather than sort of an honest plea for change, right? And I've always thought that King was on to something, actually. That he's right. We're all stuck here for a while. Shouldn't we, at the very least, try to understand our nature of quickly dividing into groups that tend to be hostile towards each other, certain of our side's purity and righteousness? About 1,800 years ago, 2nd century or so, there's the Judaism, Jewish religion. They have a book of teachings. And in that book of teachings, there's this really kind of crazy line, but I really like it. And it says this. It says, if the house has fallen, woe to the windows. If the house has fallen, woe to the windows. Now, what does that mean? Well, it's sort of getting to the idea that we're all part of a connected collective, and we do not, as much as we think we are our own sort of lone rangers in this world, we do not operate independently from one another. We are all stuck here for a while. And the fate of each of us is bound up in the whole of all of us. And while that's a simple enough idea, and I suspect most of you would agree with the idea, you'd probably also agree we're not very good at living as though we really do believe we're sort of all connected in this house, right? Because we live these very fragmented and divided lives where our politics, our political party, our political ideology, sometimes we'd mix in a little theology and all of that. We begin to wrap our lives around and center our lives around where we stand politically and the ideology around our politics. We begin to revere it and worship it. And the ancient authors of the biblical text, they have a word for that kind of behavior. It's idolatry, a false god. When we lift up an idea greater than God himself, that we begin to hold so tightly that we're willing to justify all kinds of really bad behavior so that we can elevate our way of thinking, so that we can become more and more convinced of the rightness of our way of thinking and believing and voting. And all the while, really underneath it all, it's about self-preservation and self-elevation. And in the meantime, the collective house that we're all living in, our shared experience, our shared space, the shared culture, it's growing weaker and weaker. And as it does, we stay on our sides and we begin to point fingers and we blame the other side. They're the cause for all of your misfortune. They're the cause of your grievances. And we just keep shouting back and forth. And the foundation, all the while, is deteriorating underneath us. And the roof above us is caving in. And we've become so single-mindedly focused and promoting our own that we've actually compromised the integrity, the goodness, the strength of the whole of our country, the whole of our faith, the whole of the humanity that we every day live alongside. The blame game has become America's favorite sport. Victimhood has become the latest fashion trend. And I believe we can do better. And if you're here and you would say, Team Jesus, I believe you're actually on the hook to do better, that you're supposed to be part of the solution, not a contributor to the problem, which means taking the time to learn and understand and appreciate and be curious about differences. It means learning to practice compassion in our differences instead of judgment. There's an author that I like a lot. His name's Parker Palmer, and here's what he writes about all of this. He says, "The civility we need will not come from watching our tongues." So he's essentially saying, look, yes, it's true. Rodney King's right. Can't we all just get along? I think that's right. But it's more than that. It's more than just watching your tongue. There's something deeper to it. It comes from valuing our differences. When I started this teaching series, an older couple in our church, Peg and George, they've been married 43 years. They sent me an article speaking of 1992, and it was Clinton and Bush. That was the big presidential election in 1992. There's Peg and George as younger folk. Couple argues all the way to the polls. That's them. And she's a Democrat, he's a Republican. And there's a whole little article about how they disagree on everything. And in their front yard was a Clinton sign and a Bush sign. And that's like, living in a house of like Dodger Giants fan. It's just like, how are you still married, right? How are you getting along? How is this even possible? And they were in the first service. I made them stand up, and everybody clapped. And that's when I asked. I said, "How long have you been married?" 43 years. 43, they have somehow figured out how to not just hold their tongues, but to appreciate their differences. That they, in fact, Peg in an email interaction, as I was like, "Hey, can I share? Like, you sent it to me, so as far as I'm concerned, that's fair game. You're gonna be in a sermon." And, but I just wanted to make sure. And so I said, "Hey," and she's like, "Yeah, and we went from when we first started being married to sort of arguing to be right, like waiting for the next talking point that we could drop on each other to be like, you really need to convert to, my way of thinking, to that place of understanding each other's differences." And I'm like, "Wow, you're such a great example." I was like, "You're week 3. I'm like, I'm gonna put this up during week 3. Because here's the thing. If what Christians claim to be true is true, now you may be here and you don't believe that, and that's perfectly fine. But if it is true, here's what Christians claim to be true if you're new to this idea. We claim that love has defeated death and evil. That love has already won in Jesus. And that in Jesus, a new world actually began that invites us to live in a way that brings hope and healing to the world. That's what Christians claim to be true. Now, if that's true, if that's in fact true, then I'm comfortable saying that the active, and the key word here is active, the active faith of a Jesus person is the last great hope on earth. The collective of Jesus followers practicing the way of Jesus is the hope of the world. And because we are now 78 days, I counted, from a rather heated presidential election, let me just add, for as much as I love this country, with all of its beauties, we are not the hope of the world. We really want to make America the hope of the world. We often behave as though it is the hope of the world. And our politicians go to great length to convince us that America is the hope of the world. In fact, it goes all the way back to pre-America. Maybe you're familiar with a pastor named John Winthrop. John Winthrop eventually would help found the Massachusetts Bay Colony, but before they land in America, they're in the harbor. He gives a sermon to the people. They're aboard a ship called the Arbella. And on the Arbella, he gives a sermon, and there's a very famous line in this sermon where we pretty much always go back to and grab. If we're gonna talk about America as a great hope for the world, the savior of the world, we go back to this line, because here's what John Winthrop said in that sermon. He said, "We must consider that what we're about to do, our great endeavor of starting a new world, we shall be as a city on a hill." We're that light shining bright. The eyes of all people are upon us. That our endeavor as an example for the whole world to follow. Well, 150 years later, Thomas Jefferson, in his first inaugural address to the United States, called America the world's best hope. In his 1862 State of the Union, Abraham Lincoln, talking about the Civil War, preserving the Union, said that America was the last best hope of earth. Following World War I, President Woodrow Wilson was fond of saying, America will save the world. He would go on to call America the savior of the world. President Donald Trump in 2019, in his State of the Union address, said these words: "We must keep America first in our hearts. We must keep freedom alive in our souls, and we must always keep faith in America's destiny, that one nation under God must be the hope and the promise and the light and the glory among all the nations of the world." Maybe you remember the Democrat politician Beto O'Rourke out of Texas. He said these words: "The only way for us to live up to the promise of America is to give it our all and to give it for all of us. We are truly now more than ever the last great hope on earth." Similarly, Madeleine Albright, former Secretary of State, "If we have to use force, it is because we are America. We are the indispensable nation. We stand tall. We see further into the future." Politicians on both sides of the aisle and many Americans believe this to be true, that America is the hope of the world. And America is great. It's amazing. But it's not the hope of the world. When Jesus people talk about hope and the Savior of the world, we will never mean America. We only give that title to Jesus. Hope is not something we outsource to a political party. Hope is first and foremost a theological category. And when we exploit hope for the sake of a particular country, we cheapen the message of hope for the world. Christianity isn't left. It's not right. It's not middle, that's for sure. Christianity isn't even a religion. Christianity, believe it or not, is a politic. And by politic, I mean a vision for the world, the common good, an interpretation of history. I love how one pastor put it. It's out of New York. He said, "The church is not to be found at the center of a left-right political world. The church is to be a species of its own kind, confounding left, right, and middle, and finding its identity from the center of Jesus's life." We're going to talk more about this next week as we wrap this series up, but Christianity is an alternative political system. It's an alternative way of ordering the world. And if you think I'm making that up, go back to Jesus' arrest and execution by the state. He is not being arrested and executed because he's a religious teacher. They're not accusing him of teaching something about God that's heretical. When he's confronted with the Roman governor, he is asked, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He's asked a political question. Are you offering a new politic? Are you coming in with a new way of doing things, a new way of ordering the world? Is that you? Because we've got one and we're not in the market for a new one. And if that's you, we, the now state, the one with all the power, are going to kill you. Because we can't have we can't have your politic threatening our politic. Christianity is a politic because it wrestles with and answers the same questions that our modern day politics are wrestling with and trying to answer. How do we live together? How do we deal with offense? How do we handle money? How do we deal with enemies and violence? How do we set up marriage and families and social structure? How do we sort of mediate authority? How do we employ authority? How is society ordered? How do we rightfully order our passions? Where's human history headed? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to live rightly so that all of us in this human community, that it produces like flourishing and justice and peace? Like, how do we do that? These are the questions that politicians are trying to answer, and these are the questions that Christianity is answering for the world. Christianity isn't an intellectual idea, it's a way of living in the world, rooted in love for others. But unfortunately, here's where it gets weird. Unfortunately, we've taken that idea that Christianity is this way of living in the world, rooted in love of others. We've taken that, we've just made it very personal. It's my faith, it's me and Jesus, and one day when I'm dead, I'll get to go to heaven. Well, if that's the case, there is something inside of us that needs to be attached to something much bigger than that. Not just a ticket to heaven. We need it to be inspiring and beautiful and big. And if our faith is just this thing that matters when we're dead, well, how do we make it that? Well, we attach it to something that does feel big, does feel outside of us, does feel inspiring, does feel like it can change the world. Our political camps, right? We try to take Jesus, right, who's offering a new alternative politic, and we instead say, well, no, it's just, my heart and what's going to happen to my soul after I die. And so we need it to be more than that. And so we attach it to something that feels like it is more, and that's our politic. We try to cram it into Republican or Democrat, elephant or donkey, red or blue, left or right. And by the way, I know some of you are already like, Forrest is wearing all blue. He's a Democrat. I know it. Look at him. He's wearing blue. I almost wore blue shoes today. It was like this close. And I know y'all, I get so many comments about what I wear. I'm always like, geez, aren't you guys listening? Just staring at what I'm wearing. And I'm like, what am I doing? and so I promise you, I just like blue. And today felt like a shark day. So there's sharks on my shirt. But it just doesn't work when we try to take Jesus, we cram him into left, right, Republican, Democrat, elephant, donkey, red, blue, right? It just doesn't work. And ultimately, because it doesn't work, what does it do? It leads to unnecessary divisiveness and bitterness and finger pointing. Jesus, so he's had his kind of last meal with his friends, his closest friends, and they're kind of in the middle of this conversation, and he prays. He wants to pray for them. But something really cool happens in that prayer. He doesn't just pray for the people in front of him. He does pray for the people in front of him, but then he goes on and he prays for you and I. And then in the middle of that prayer, he actually has a request. He's asking that something happen. And so here's what happens. I'll just read you the prayer. His friend John records it, and John was there. John was one of the ones he was praying for. And can we actually go to the prayer? There we go. So my prayer is not for them alone. So not just for John and the fellas. I pray also for those who believe in me through their message. And so who is he talking about? He's talking about the next generation of Christians, and the next generation of Christians, and the next, and the next, and the next, and the next, all the way to you and I. That all of them, here's his request, that all of them may be one. Father, just as you are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us. Jesus could have prayed for anything. He chose to pray for unity, knowing full well we would never agree on everything. Apparently, Jesus was convinced, as impossible as unity sounds, that it was possible, that it was more than possible, it was mission critical. It was imperative. He could have prayed for anything. It's not an add-on. It's not a, can't we all just get along? It's that idea taken deep. That we should actually be intentional about ensuring that there's unity in our faith, unity in our faith community, unity in that we should actually work to be the answer to Jesus' prayer. And no doubt it doesn't come naturally. And the reason I think it doesn't come naturally is, well, we only know what we know, right? And we were raised by who we were raised by. And we've experienced what we've experienced. And so what we do is we tend to sort of attach ourselves to political tribes that fit our moral narrative of the world. And then once that happens, for whatever reason, we just become really blind to any other suggestion that there might be an alternative narrative out there. And so then we just root ourselves and we go after the other side. They're the problem. So we run to these little corners and just put ourselves in these echo chambers where we only hear, we're right, we're right, we're right. Your cause is pure, your cause is pure, your cause is pure. And pretty soon, and they're attacking it, they're attacking it, they're attacking it, right? And I think Jesus is suggesting we don't have to live that way. That now, if you weren't here last week we said, look, we talked about my buddy Josh Ryan Butler's book, and we talked about a phrase he said in there. He said, bring your lean, but submit your bow. So bring your political opinion, that we actually need it. Bring it. It's welcome here, right? But always submit your allegiance, your bow, your worship to Jesus, that we can all, in the midst of our differences, find this one thing that we are all unified on, and his name is Jesus. And Jesus didn't pray for unity so that we could sing Kumbaya. He prayed for unity because of what he knew he could accomplish through that unity. He prayed for unity because of what could get done in the midst of our unity. He tells us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. That's why he prayed it. I think we have a slide for that. The rest of the prayer. There we go. So that the world may believe that you've sent me. The reason I want them to be one is not for them. It's not for church people. That's not it. It's for the people outside the church, the people outside the faith, the people who roll their eyes every time they drive by a neighborhood church. I want them to be one for those people, so that when they see their unity, in spite of their differences, in spite of their diversity, they may actually come to the conclusion there's a better way to live. Now, Jesus is who he says he is. This is imperative. It's mission critical. I mean, he could have prayed for anything. He prayed for unity. That the world was going to sit up and take notice if we could figure it out. I said in week 1 that difference is inevitable. Difference is inevitable. Division is a choice. You and I agreeing, that's no way are we going to agree on everything. Not going to happen. But me deciding I'm going to take my ball and go home, that's a choice you made. And based on Jesus' prayer, I would argue it's a choice you're making that runs against what Jesus is trying to accomplish in the world. It's a choice you're making that is anti-Jesus when you choose to divide. When you choose to say, nope, you're over there, I'm over here, I'm good, you're bad, that's it. Either you leave or I leave. Right? We are never going to see the world the same way. Let's just acknowledge that reality. And then let's make a choice to not divide, but to be actually unified. That reality actually got the attention of the world once. For those first Christians in the Roman Empire, it changed the world. And I believe it'll eventually get the attention of our world today. If we're willing to be a part of the solution and not the problem, right? And Jesus, right before he says this prayer, he actually commands Jesus people. So if you're here and you're a Jesus person, this wasn't like, hey, it'd be cool. I mean, it was more like, this is what you need to do. I'm commanding you. I mean, it's a very strong statement. And here's what Jesus commanded. A new command I give you. Love one another as I've loved you, so you must love one another. I mean, go love each other. It's not a suggestion. If you're a Jesus person, not a suggestion. If you're here and you're not a Jesus person, number one, you're welcome. You can be a part of our family here and not believe what it is we believe. You're not on the hook for it. I think it's a great suggestion. You should give it a try, but you're not on the hook. If you're here and you're Jesus, you're on the hook for loving one another. Why? Well, it actually has nothing to do with you. It's so that people would come to know that Jesus is who he says he is. By this, Jesus says, my new command I give you, love one another. Here's why. It's kind of the same deal as unity. So that by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, that you follow me if you love one another. It's not just so we can all get along. As much as that's awesome, this kind of unique love of one another, even if we have our differences, that kind of love, that moves the needle in the world. Because it's not normal. But I said this in week 1, politics matters so much. It's so important. Politics matter because people matter. And last time I checked, people matter a lot to Jesus. But they don't matter so much that we actually push people away. We bring our lean, bring it. It's welcome here, right? It's all good, but we worship Jesus. The politics of Jesus, I would say this, the politics of Jesus matter more. Love matters more. We can love without agreement. That's possible. By the way, agreement and acceptance, very different ideas, by the way. I think sometimes we think that it's not, right? I think we think, well, I disagree with you, so I have to distance myself from you because if I don't, then it's like I'm agreeing with you, or I'm now sort of guilty by association, and so I'm not gonna go to that wedding, and I'm not gonna associate with that person, and I'm not gonna, because then people might think I agree, or I don't think that's wrong, or what, and it's like, what? We can honor without harmony. We can respect without conformity. We can disagree politically and love unconditionally. We can be the answer to Jesus' prayer. There's a phenomenal book out there. It's called The Space Between Us. It's written by a woman named Sarah Bauer Anderson, and I love this book because it's Sarah's story. Now, Sarah has a unique story in that she grew up in a family filled with politicians and pastors, which means every night the dinner table was crazy, right? In fact, she grew up just outside of DC. Her dad was you might know that name, Bauer, right? Her dad was a one-time Republican presidential candidate, Gary Bauer. I mean, she's in it. She grew up in the tension that politics and religion can create. And so she wrote a book about her story, and here's how she opens the book. We've been asking, how do I get others to change their minds, see as I do, come to my side and be like me? But what if instead we started asking, how can we begin to close the space between us? What if instead of trying to make us the same, we got better at understanding and appreciating where we're different? What if we learned to practice compassion in our differences instead of judgment. And she makes this rather compelling argument using her life story and the wisdom of the biblical authors to convince the reader that she's come to believe that against all odds, it's possible to move towards one another when distance seems inevitable and connection feels impractical. To see each other as people, not people to change or people to convince or to people to get on your team, but just simply people to understand, people to honor, people to respect, people to be compassionate towards. Bauer points to this great moment, and if you're a Bible person, you know this moment. If you're not, let me try to set it up. She points to the moment where Jesus is brought into a rather tense, sort of political, religious kind of scene. A woman's been caught in adultery. And adultery was a capital crime in the time of Jesus, in the first century in Israel. And the consequence for adultery was that they would throw rocks at you until you died. And so Jesus is brought into this. So a bunch of religious leaders have this woman. And they're like, Jesus, we caught her in adultery. What should we do? Now they all knew the right thing to do. They knew what the law said. They weren't like really looking for advice. This woman at this point has become bait for the religious leaders to try to catch Jesus in having the wrong position on an issue. Right? I mean, it's a litmus test, if you will. And our society, I mean, it's not new. What we're doing is not new, right? What does Jesus have to say about adultery? We'll know now which team he's on, right? I mean, we do this all the time to each other. What do you think about abortion? What do you think about the LGBTQ community? What do you think, I mean, it's just, here we go. And then based on your answer, if you're wearing blue or red or whatever, then I'll know, as though people are that simple. But that's what's happening. It's a litmus test. Jesus, what should we do with this woman? And they all know. They all had a position, and it was, let's throw rocks at her till she's dead. And Jesus knows. He knows the right position. He knows the law. But Jesus' response is fascinating. He doesn't say a word. He just bends down, grabs a stick, and starts drawing something in the sand. We don't know what it is. It's been freaking people out for 2,000 years that we don't know what it is that he wrote. It's like, why wouldn't you tell us? And so, but the response of whatever he was writing, of the religious leaders, is fascinating. They all just pause. Jesus stands up and says, if any one of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw the stone at her. And then they all just left. Just one by one, they all just took off. And what happens now? I mean, could you imagine this moment? Let's kill her. Like, it's this very intense. Jesus, are you on our team or are you not on our team? Here's the test, Jesus. You're going to throw rocks at her with us? It's this powerful moment, and Jesus doesn't say a word. He's drawing something. Everybody, takes off. And then Jesus turns to the woman, I can only imagine, with the deepest of compassion. And he says these words. Jesus straightened up and asked her, woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? No one, sir, she said. Then neither do I condemn you. Jesus declared, go now and leave your life of sin. Now here's Bauer's insight in the book that I just found really, really fascinating. She said, look, there's two things at play here. There's position and there's posture at play. She said, position is what I believe to be right and true. And we all have a position on whatever issue, right? What we believe to be right and true. He said, but then there's posture. And the posture is, how do I respond to others around me in light of what I believe to be right and true, right? Yes, your position matters. What you believe to be right and true matters, right? But so does how you treat people in light of that reality. The religious leaders cared primarily about the position. Here's the right thing to do, Jesus, and we're gonna get you on this issue. Jesus seems to care a lot more about the woman than upholding the law. He was concerned first and foremost how she was treated. Jesus was passionate about how she seemed to be talked to, looked at, how to preserve her humanity in the midst of a really incredibly dehumanizing moment. He maintained this posture that she mattered more than his position on the issue. And Jesus is not pro-adultery. He's absolutely not for adultery. His stance on the issue was in fact the same as the religious leaders, right? His position on the issue was the same. But Jesus valued her way too much to pick up a rock and throw it at her. Valued her personhood, the image of God in her. That took precedence over fixing her behavior, changing her position. And Bauer brings up a great question. She says, what if? What if in our current divided, politically charged times, we've unknowingly become the religious leaders collecting stones? What's your position? Give me the right answer, or I actually have a whole bag of stones I'm going to start throwing. Right? And it's not because we don't believe rightly. It's not because we didn't know the right things, not because we didn't have the right convictions, but because we were right maybe in all the important ways except one. How we treated people in light of what we knew. Sometimes, when I watch the behavior of those who run around pledging allegiance to Jesus and how they treat people of political differences, I wonder if we haven't become the religious leaders and we're just surrounding the woman caught in adultery. And I wonder if Jesus wouldn't be stooping down, writing something in the sand that would cause us to just shut up and walk away. Well, Forrest, Jesus, he told her to go and sin no more. You're right, he did. You're not Jesus. He became judge so we don't have to. He became judge so we'd be free to love. Convinced of the righteousness of our cause, our political party of choice, we've sacrificed the posture of love on the altar of the right position. It's fracturing churches. It's fracturing our country. It's fracturing communities. It's fracturing families and workplaces. And if you're a Jesus person, we've just commanded to do better. We've drifted, I think, towards becoming self-righteous religious leaders who gather the stones to judge the positions of people who just have different positions than us. Sacrificing a posture of kindness and compassion. We sacrifice those things on the altar of being right. You may very well be right. You don't have to spend your life telling people. Just be nice. Anderson says this: it's moving from I want to be right to being right may not be as important as being kind. It's realizing being right has more to do with the position we take and being kind with a posture we pursue while holding a position. Again, it's not sacrificing what you know to be right and true. That's great. You should have some positions on some things. Just don't want to murder the person who thinks differently than you. It's easier, listen, it is so easy to be right in our beliefs. So easy to be right in our beliefs. Way easier to be right in our beliefs than it is to be wise and kind and generous in our treatment of others who we've decided hold wrong beliefs, right? Bring your lean. Whatever your political affiliation, it's welcome here. Bring your lean. We need it. Submit your bow, your allegiance. Submit it to Jesus. Let's work together to be the answer to his prayer, that we would be one. And as a result, the people who drive by and roll their eyes might one day pull into the parking lot. And maybe, just maybe, find a place where their lives can be changed. Man, you got very serious vibes in the room today. I mean, are you guys like okay? Like, I'm just like getting a lot of emotional energy from you all. So, we okay? We okay? And yes, I've been asked so many times about what we did up here with the colors. Yes, we did it on purpose, you know. Party crap, right? No, never mind, okay. Okay, I'm the last guy to say things, so here's everyone, please welcome my friend Jordan. Welcome my friend Jordan. Now, you're going down. Let me tell you about my friend Jordan. Jordan just got to work, by the way. He's late. It's 11 in the morning. Jordan texted myself and Kelly last night. He was in Seattle visiting some friends. Supposed to get on a flight last night and be here for work in the morning. He texts, says, fellas, been having some trouble with my flight this evening, missed my flight, gonna have to take the one in the morning, I'll be late. And my initial thought was, well, what do you mean you missed a flight? He said, no, I got there in plenty of time, went through security like a breeze, sitting at my gate, just enjoying life, clearly not paying a lot of attention of what's going on around him. They had moved the gate, and he didn't notice, and his plane just flew away without him. So, that's all. The effort you made to be here for prayer, for the end of the second service is admirable. Yeah. So with that said, we do have our prayer team is available. Jordan is feeling spunky this morning and awake and fired up. His flight left at 7:30, which means about a 5 a.m. arrival at the airport. Yeah, but we do care about what's going on in your life, and the prayer table is a great way to share that and have somebody pray for you. Also, man, if you're a family with kids K through 6, come tonight. It's gonna be a blast. If you went to our Christmas show a couple of Christmases ago, very similar thing. It's like 45 minutes, just a huge party for kids. It's free, bring a friend. And then also, really seriously, man, join a group. If you don't have community, if you feel like you just need to grow spiritually, there's all kinds of different groups, and explore them. Go outside on the patio. They'll answer all the questions. With that said, let me pray for us. Jesus, thank you. When you pray big, Jesus. Your prayer that we'd be one is no small thing. And we're pretty sorry that we've maybe sacrificed unity and compassion on the altar of our being right. Would you help us to be people who care about the humanity of others, willing to take the time to hear their story, to practice love, compassion, generosity, kindness. That we'd be the answer to your prayer, Jesus. That's what we want to be. We love you, and it's in your name we pray. Amen. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.